Now in life we all go through phases like the teenage years where you can say I was a little bit awkward, but then I got to my 20s and thankfully I was still awkward. But finally when I got to my 30s, well, I definitely had moved far away from, okay, I was still awkward. But my point is that we all go through phases. I never changed. However, over in the automotive world, we don't have to wait for generation or year after year. Instead, we can kind of have multitude of phases all in one fell swoop. Hey, welcome to this Edition Road Warrior. I'm your host, Grant Roberson. Now let me explain what I'm referring to. Specifically behind me is the 2022 Hyundai Elantra N. Now, if you've seen the Elantra in general, it is a nice kind of blend in traffic and doesn't really want to cause any ruffles behind other people's feathers. But when you add the N addition to this model, well, the need for speed kicks in. Maybe I grow out my hair. I definitely roll down the windows and, well, I tap the little gas to get that exhaust, well, thumping. So at first glance, it's pretty easy to figure out what the N addition does to the Elantra. Really right here at the back end, at the lower portion with that flared out side adorned in that red, as well as at the four corners. This is dressed up, you could say, to not fit in with traffic, but to kind of kick it in the face. This having a lot more wow factor that delivers with the inline. Now I've driven a few other inlines, specifically the Sonata, and I do recall it being kind of a pizzazz wow factor. But this one, you could say, took it to the Fast and Furious level. Obviously on the exterior, but most notably there behind the wheel. Now with this week's test drive, certainly you could expect that, well, I'm testing out the 0 to 60 numbers, but if you know me, well, that's just not my cup of tea. But instead, we tasked it with a long test drive, basically headed north to Buffalo, New York, round trip of about 1,300 miles. So less about speed, but more about comfort. And this vehicle did quite well. Even more impressive is on the way home, we went through about 3 out of 4 seasons. Not anything like we see here today, but instead wind, rain, torrential downpours, and even snow that actually did accumulate there on the roadway. And how did this front wheel drive vehicle do? Well, surprisingly quite well. But what we had to do, of course, is drive slower, drive safer, because this is front wheel drive only, not all wheel drive, which would have been a nice caveat if we'd had the grip at the four corners. But thankfully, 10 and 2, headed steady, and this vehicle did quite well. Now the Elantra has specifically about 7 phases of lives. I mentioned earlier the SE, the SEL, the Blue HEV, the Limited HEV, as well as the Inline and N that you see here. A little bit of play on acronyms that can get you confused quite quickly. Now, when I think of this vehicle, especially with kind of that need for speed atmosphere, I tend to put it in kind of this smallish, compact-like feel. But by the numbers, this is kind of measuring up just shy of the mid-size segment. Overall, about 184 inches as it sits, wheelbase around about 107. As for width, just around about 6 feet wide, and height about 55 inches tall. Lastly is ground clearance around about 5.3 inches. What does that mean at the end of the day? Well, this vehicle actually truly measures up. Basically, when it comes to legroom numbers, both front and back, equally feeling great. And this back here, because after all, for a weekend getaway, specifically way up north with a whole bunch of extra things thrown in, this cargo to boot, well, made this feel less small and quite large. Now, if you're like me, when you sit behind the wheel of a vehicle, you're going down the road, you tend to compare it to the likes of, well, everything around you, and even comparing the vehicle you're in with, well, other models in that lineup. Now, that's what happened to me on the open road. As other Elantra models would drive by, I would kind of look at them, raise my eyebrow and go, oh, that must be the nerd version versus the cool factor we have here. And yes, I tended to want to flip my hair and have that kind of swagger, but that's what the N Series does. And where you see it, of course, is all in the flare. Down at the bottom, the aforementioned spoiler and the touches of black accents. This not having any dressed up chrome because, well, we're just too cool for that. What you also see in generic terms with the Elantra is the chiseling up that really works well when you badge it out with the N Series. Specifically this midline right here, flaring down and angling back this way, coupling nicely, of course, with the lower effects there. What you also see is the red accents even dressed up to the brake calipers. Lastly is what's sitting at the four corners, specifically 245 35s wrapping a 19-inch wheel. From the profile, you can certainly see all the chiseling up, and the grill warfare is where it kind of all culminates, really angling down with all the various edging right through the hood and sweeping. Now, what you'd expect maybe is that this was angled up a little bit, having a nosing effect, but I like what they did instead, which is a little bit more of a blunt force trauma. Now, for the accents up here, a little bit more of a matte finish look versus glossing it up, which I do like for the, again, extra contrast. As for airflow, you're certainly seeing it in this upper portion, solid right through the middle, and again, tucking in low, and even in this lower fascia as well. Sweeping it around to the side, a little superficial fascia, but it is chiseled up with a lot of geometric shapes. Swinging around though with all the angler, it is operational here on the side, allowing the air to flow around, tuck in, and dump out here at the wheel wells. So with the N-Line and the N-Series, there certainly can be some confusion, but when comparing it to the phases of life, you could say the N-Line is for those ready to take the training wheels off, and the N-Series is for those ready to move to, well, more muscle, specifically what lies beneath the hood. Now, what you're going to find on the N-Line is a 1.6 liter turbo GDI inline 4-cylinder. That delivers around about 201 horses and 195 foot-pounds of torque, but the next stomping fun is what we see here, specifically a 2.0 liter turbocharged flat-powered 4-cylinder. It delivers around about 276 horses and 289 foot-pounds of torque, but the best of all is what's equipped there on the steering wheel, specifically with that NGS button, and at the press of it adds another 10 horsepower. Now, before we get to the business end of things, because as always on this trip, this certainly delivered, but the cargo had to really take it to the next level. And with this vehicle, again, in my head, thinking it's smaller than it actually is, well, these numbers truly measured up. Now, before we get there, let's talk about Ingress. This one being kind of on the upper level of intuitiveness. No interaction with the key fob, but really all starting here at the front. Simply a nice little press here will lock things up. When you come back to the vehicle, just simply slide your hand right in, unlocks with ease. Now, like a lot of vehicles in this series, basically no interaction here at the back seat. And one thing I found, if we can put it here, I always argue, give me Ingress at every axis, but just kind of a little argument I always make on vehicles that, well, fall short. Now, where this vehicle certainly delivered is here at the back end. Really, when it came to cargo space, what we found is just over 14 cubic feet. And with the legroom numbers truly measuring up, I was surprised there was anything left back here, but there was. Now, how to get in? One thing they've done here on the Elantra versus the Sonata is not hide the button to access, which they do on the Sonata here in the H, but with this being angled, that would be a little bit more difficult. Instead, they just put a little button here that springs up with ease, and what you're going to find is a very cavernous opening. To be expected, again, with the throw of this rear end, this is what you expect to have left over. But what you don't expect is being able to literally climb inside, and certainly those cross member bars that help stiffen this vehicle up, again, with this sporty ride. Plenty of acreage that certainly gobbled up our weekend affair. With the exterior sport, this vehicle would fall flat if it didn't couple nicely with the inside, and well, the Elantra N really delivers, specifically with the sport style seating in the front, or even right down to the illuminated end just below the headrest, and all those open face ports on either side really gives that racing overall look and design. And as you sweep down, you'll see the bucket styling with the bolstering on the outer side, not too enveloping, which means it'll handle almost any size individual with ease. As for operation, we'll find it in the form of manual, vertical up and down with this lever, as well as traditional settings here for the pull handle for the vertical alignment of the back. As for to and fro, just simply pull this here, slide it back and forth. As for legroom numbers, well, this is what I kept having to remind myself. This vehicle is no slouch, specifically around about 42 inches of legroom up front and a whopping 38 inches of legroom here in the back. Now, as for overall styling, traditional bench across the back, a little bit of forming on the outer side, but overall comfort really equates to, well, what you find right here with great legroom numbers. Digital is the name of the game, first starting with a huge oversized touchscreen LCD display, but where it ends is with the nice digital readout for the gauge clutch. cluster. Now, a lot of sports enthusiasts would argue they'd rather have analog gauges instead of the digital, but I'd say out with the old and in with the new, because the graphical interface really is intuitive and exactly what I'm looking for. With the steering wheel, there's a lot going on, and with spirited sprints, there's one aspect you need to know, and with more cruises, well, there's others you're going to be more entwined with. And for my test drive, it was really more about this area and this being really ease of infotainment changes, specifically entertainment, volume select, and so on. This side being cruise select, which pretty much we did non-stop. But for those that want a little bit more neck snapping fun, these little indicators really are what you're going to interact with. Custom settings, both adorned with a little bit of changes in the emblazing, as well as the paddle shifters back here. But most of you are probably noticing this button right here, and I test this out a little bit, and I'll show you in just a second. But this is the NGS button, or more specifically an extra 10 horses at the press of a button. And when you hit it, the gauge cluster changes, gives you a 20-second countdown, and also that extended rev limit, basically allows you to shift on the fly and boot, scoot, and boogie. Not necessarily as important on the racetrack, but really for the long test drive, dual zones up front really allowed the pilot and co-pilot to find their specific settings. Now what you'll find is just ease of digital selection for temperature, fan speed in the form of this press button for fan speed. I do prefer a knob, but this does add to more of a sleek overall look. You also have heated front seats, very intense, so I doubt you'll ever use the 3-level, probably just stick with the first level. One aspect that used to be hard to find but really becoming more of a regular event is the wireless charging you find here on the N series. You do have traditional connections as well, with 2 USBs and a traditional car outlet if you want to go Throwback Thursday. If you don't like the paddle shifters, want to go old school as well, you can toggle this over and do the traditional back and forth 4-gear selection. As for the next favorite area, well, it's going to be this button here, the drive mode select. That's going to allow you to simply pick between the various functions, either econo, normal, or sport. This also comes in handy, as you'll learn in just a second when test driving. Should you accidentally press one of these when you're on the open road, well, it's going to give the vehicle a manual-like feel, wanting you to shift, but when you're on the highway speed, just not necessary. So you're going to want to reach down here and reselect one of the other modes. Another cabinet area may be found right between the front occupants, specifically the dual cup holders, really handling any drink and almost enveloping it where you can almost barely get it out, specifically smaller coffee cups. Now what you will find is this addition here that really extends the bottom of the cup holder up, will hold smaller drinks with ease, and maybe helps with smaller items that you want to place in and not have to reach down. What you also find is a nice center console, really handles everything, but it isn't illuminated and you won't find any connectivity in there either. Now this week's test drive was really more about point A to B. We didn't get off the beaten path and go through the good old winding curves, so we didn't get to test all the shifting abilities with this vehicle. What I'm referring to is the nice red button here on the steering wheel. You can say this is maybe that nitrous kick that we've all been looking for straight from the manufacturer, but obviously it doesn't go to that level, but it does add a little bit of extra boost. And all you have to do is pretty much press the NGS button, also known as Ingress shift, I assume, because once you press it, there is a little bit of smirk that comes over you. Now what you'll notice is when you kick it, it adds an extra 10 horsepower to the overall performance. Also gives you a lot higher RPM rev point shifts, and it makes even this novice look a little bit cooler. You can obviously, if you can hear it in the back, give a little bit of that popping noise from the exhaust. Again, a little bit of need for speed. Now interestingly, there is a timer that kicks on there on the digital readout. It's kind of a 20-second countdown, because that's about the 20 seconds of fun that you can hammer this vehicle and really get it going down the road. Now after that, you will have to wait about 40 seconds to give the engine a little bit of time to cool down. Once you're there again, then you can simply press the button and keep having some more fun. Now other than the couple times I hit the NGS button and that full throttle noise invaded the cabin just a little bit, other than that, really no road harshness or noise to speak of here in the cabin, really making for a nice refined long journey back home. Now it does for this edition of Road Warrior, and a test drive behind the wheel of the 2022 Hyundai Elantra N series, a vehicle that is like a thoroughbred, but like any thoroughbred, it can be harnessed and the power used for good, because certainly going 0 to 60 is some fun, but holding it for the length of the race may be just where this vehicle is headed. And what we liked is certainly the round trip affair, 1,300 miles all in, and not a wear and tear on this vehicle to be found. Now, as always, thank you for watching this edition of Road Warrior. Keep both hands on the wheel and eyes straight ahead.